Burkina Faso is facing a coordinated wave of terror, with attacks reportedly striking at the core of its military infrastructure. Reports say that hundreds of terrorists launched attacks across the country's northern and eastern frontiers.
Africa is under attack. In the dead of night, northern Burkina Faso erupted. Not tension, not a rumor. An organized, violent assault. A military position was hit before dawn. Communications fractured. Reinforcements were rushed into a darkness still echoing with gunfire. By the time the first light touched the sand, the battlefield had already turned into a global headline. By early morning, numbers were circulating, some confirmed, some not. By midday, the phrase major attack was dominating feeds. By nightfall, commentators across continents were declaring what this meant for Ibrahim Traoré's leadership, for Burkina Faso's stability, for the entire Sahel. But slow down. What actually happened in those hours before the world reacted? Was this a devastating rupture in the country's security framework, or a calculated insurgent strike engineered for maximum psychological shock? And what does Traoré have to say about it? Let's find out. Before the phrase major attack began circulating, there was movement, deliberate, coordinated movement. This was not a random burst of violence. It was an organized assault on a security position in a northern zone long exposed to insurgent activity. The timing mattered. The terrain mattered. The target mattered. Armed groups operating in the Sahel rarely strike without reconnaissance. These are not chaotic mobs. They observe patrol routines. They monitor reinforcement timelines. They test defensive weaknesses before committing force. When they attack a fortified base, it is because they believe the psychological return outweighs the tactical risk. Initial reports indicated heavy fighting. Casualty numbers were inconsistent in the first hours, which is typical in conflict environments where communication lines are disrupted. But beyond fluctuating figures, the structural reality was clear. Insurgents were able to assemble, advance, and overwhelm defenses temporarily. That word, temporarily, is important. In this region, insurgent operations often follow a pattern. Fighters converge, deliver maximum impact, seize weapons if possible, and withdraw before air or ground reinforcements consolidate. Their objective is not permanent occupation, it is shocking. It is to puncture the perception of invulnerability. It is to show that no position is beyond reach. This tells us two things at once. First, the insurgency retains mobility and operational discipline. It has not dissolved. It can still coordinate multi-layered attacks. Second, this was not a sweeping territorial takeover. It was a strike-and-withdraw maneuver designed to destabilize confidence. Understanding that difference is crucial. A collapsing army loses cities. A pressured army absorbs attacks. Now the deeper layer, why this location? Northern Burkina Faso is not just a battlefield, it is a corridor. It connects cross-border routes that insurgent networks have used for years, stretching toward Mali and Niger. These corridors allow fluid movement of fighters and supplies. Even when territory is reclaimed, these networks remain adaptive. This is asymmetric warfare. The state defends fixed positions. Insurgents exploit fluid space. But here is what the headline does not show. Military conflict in the Sahel is not linear. Gains and setbacks coexist. Territory may be stabilized in one province while volatility spikes in another. Momentum is uneven. So the question is not whether an attack happened. It did. The real question is this: was this strike an isolated tactical surge, or evidence that the state's broader security framework is cracking under pressure? To answer that, we must look beyond the smoke of one battlefield and examine the architecture behind the strategy itself. When Ibrahim Traoré assumed leadership, he did not inherit a blank slate. He inherited a war already years deep, a war where previous strategies had leaned heavily on centralized command and foreign-backed counterinsurgency operations. The result had been mixed at best. Territory fluctuated. Civilian displacement expanded. Confidence eroded. The pivot that followed was not cosmetic. It was architectural. The expansion of the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland (VDP) became the centerpiece. Instead of relying solely on a stretched regular army, The state widened its defensive perimeter by mobilizing local civilians into structured auxiliary forces. The logic was strategic. Insurgents thrive where the state is absent, so shrink absence. Local volunteers understand terrain differently. They recognize unfamiliar movement patterns. They know which seasonal routes are used for grazing and which are used for smuggling. That local intelligence advantage is powerful, but distributed defense introduces complexity. A centralized army operates within clear command chains. A distributed network requires constant synchronization, training standards, communication systems, and reinforcement timing. Any gap becomes visible under pressure. An attack like the one we're examining does not automatically mean the model failed. It may mean coordination lagged. It may mean intelligence misreads signals. It may mean insurgents exploited a temporary blind spot. That distinction matters. Now layer in the geopolitical shift. Burkina Faso reduced its dependence on former colonial security partnerships and deepened cooperation within the Alliance of Sahel States (AES) alongside Mali and Niger. This move reoriented military collaboration toward regional alignment rather than external oversight. Intelligence sharing, joint patrol concepts, and strategic messaging began evolving within this new framework. But realignment is not instantaneous. Replacing one security architecture with another requires recalibration. During recalibration, adversaries test the edges. This is not unique to Burkina Faso. Historically, whenever a state restructures its security doctrine, whether post-colonial Algeria in the 1960s or Iraq during security transitions, insurgent actors intensify operations to probe weaknesses. The deeper issue then is not whether attacks occur. They will. The issue is whether the architecture adapts faster than the insurgency evolves. Consider this. Insurgent groups in the Sahel operate with fluid command structures and decentralized cells. They do not require parliamentary debates to change tactics. They adjust quickly. A state, by contrast, must coordinate across ministries, commands, and logistics networks. That asymmetry is structural. So when a base is struck hard, the critical measurement is not the casualty count alone. It is the state's response cycle. How quickly are reinforcements deployed? How rapidly is air or ground counterpressure applied? How effectively is intelligence reconfigured to prevent replication? If those cycles tighten, the model strengthens. If delays compound, vulnerabilities widen. Which leads us forward. Beyond architecture and battlefield mechanics, what does this moment reveal about the wider regional chessboard shaping Burkina Faso's conflict? Zoom out from the base that was attacked. Zoom out from the smoke. Zoom out from the headlines. Burkina Faso is not fighting this war alone, even when it stands alone in the spotlight. Northern Burkina Faso bleeds into Mali. Eastern corridors lean toward Niger. Fighters do not respect the colonial lines drawn in the late 19th century. Smuggling routes, ethnic linkages, and desert paths existed long before flags. The insurgency in the Sahel is not national, it is regional. This matters more than most people realize. When Ibrahim Traoré aligned Burkina Faso with Mali and Niger under the Alliance of Sahel States (AES), it was not just a political announcement. It was a structural realignment of the security environment. These three states are now attempting to coordinate outside older Western-led frameworks. Intelligence exchange, border patrol synchronization, and joint military postures are being recalibrated within this bloc. That recalibration changes the balance. But here is the paradox. Every major transition in security alliances creates instability before it creates stability. When a country shifts partnerships, adversaries test it. They probe command structures. They assess response speed. They examine whether coordination between allies is symbolic or operational. An attack in Burkina Faso, therefore, is not only a Burkina Bay event. It is a stress test for the AES model itself. Can cross-border intelligence prevent replication? Can Mali reinforce pressure along shared corridors? Can Niger coordinate containment on its side of the line? If cooperation is real, insurgent mobility narrows. If coordination lags, porous borders remain advantageous points. Now consider the global dimension. The Sahel has become one of the most strategically watched regions in the world. Gold reserves, uranium deposits, migration routes, Counterinsurgency narratives. External powers are not passive observers, they calculate. When Burkina Faso reduces dependence on former colonial military structures and opens space for diversified partnerships, it shifts diplomatic gravity. Some actors welcome this autonomy. Others view it with caution or concern. In geopolitics, power vacuums rarely stay empty. They are contested. So when a major attack occurs, it is not only a battlefield event. It becomes a data point in larger geopolitical arguments. Critics say, see, the pivot is destabilizing. Supporters say, see, the old model never solved it either. But armed groups are not ideological commentators. They exploit opportunity. If a security realignment is underway, insurgents seek to destabilize it early, before structures solidify. That is how asymmetric actors operate in transitional phases. Now here is the sharper question. Is this attack evidence that the regional model is fragile, or evidence that insurgents are reacting to consolidation? There is a difference. If attacks multiply without a coordinated response across borders, fragility is exposed. If joint pressure intensifies and mobility shrinks, the insurgency faces compression. Regional strategy is not judged by one incident. It is judged by trend lines. And that brings us to a psychological reality far more powerful than troop movements. Why does a single violent event feel like a national turning point, even when the broader regional war has been ongoing for years? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Because modern conflict no longer ends at the battlefield. It travels through screens. A base is attacked in the north. Within minutes, someone uploads fragments, smoke in the distance, voices shouting, blurred movement. Within an hour, casualty numbers appear, often unverified. By midday, captions grow larger than facts. Words like catastrophic, historic, and worst move faster than confirmation ever could. And something subtle happens. The attack stops being a tactical event. It becomes emotional infrastructure. In psychology, there is a phenomenon called availability bias. People assess reality based on what is most vivid and recent in their minds. A dramatic event overwhelms memory. It shrinks context. It convinces observers that what just happened defines the entire trajectory. Armed groups understand this instinctively. Their operations are not only military, but they are also theatrical. They aim for maximum psychological spread. A strike against a fortified position carries more narrative weight than dozens of small skirmishes repelled quietly. They know that visibility multiplies impact. But here is the deeper problem for a country like Burkina Faso. The Sahel has already been branded as the global epicenter of insurgency by international conflict trackers. That label sticks. It shapes how investors think, how diplomats speak, how journalists frame. So when an attack occurs, it does not enter a neutral narrative space. It lands in a pre-existing storyline of fragility. And fragility sells. For African Gen Z watching this unfold, there is a constant tension between pride and exhaustion. Pride in a leadership that speaks the language of sovereignty. Exhaustion from years of instability that predated. So when one violent event is magnified, it triggers a collective question. Are we moving forward or just circling the crisis? This is why perception matters as much as military recovery. If a society begins to believe that every attack is proof of collapse, confidence drains faster than territory. Confidence is invisible, but it is foundational. When people stop believing in momentum, even small setbacks feel terminal. Yet history teaches something uncomfortable. No insurgency is defeated in a straight line. Colombia fought the FARC for decades before stabilization. Sri Lanka endured years of fluctuating battlefield dynamics before ending its civil war. Even European states took centuries to consolidate central authority. Violent spikes do not equal strategic failure unless response falters. And this is where leadership communication becomes decisive. Does the state address the event with clarity? Does it avoid denial without fueling panic? Does it demonstrate operational action instead of rhetorical reassurance? Narrative control is not about censorship. It is about coherence. A nation under pressure needs a storyline that acknowledges reality while preserving direction. Insurgent groups aim to fracture that storyline. They want confusion. They want doubt amplified. They want citizens to ask whether the state is hollow, which leads to the generational shift unfolding beneath all of this. How does Africa's younger population interpret moments like this? Not as spectators, but as stakeholders in the continent's future. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. They are not watching the explosions. They are watching the pattern. Africa's Gen Z, especially in the Sahel, did not wake up yesterday to insecurity. They grew up inside it. They have seen presidents promise reform. They have seen foreign troops deploy with press conferences and withdraw with explanations. They have watched maps change colors without their villages changing conditions. So when a major attack happens, their reaction is different from that of older generations. They don't panic first. They evaluate. They ask questions that are colder and sharper. Is territory being retaken over time? Are supply routes safer than 2 years ago? Are local defense forces better equipped than before? Are schools reopening in previously abandoned zones? This generation measures trajectory, not drama. That is why Ibrahim Traoré's appeal is not based only on rhetoric. It is rooted in disruption. He represents a break from negotiated stagnation. He projects resistance to dependency politics. He speaks the language of sovereignty with clarity instead of caution. But clarity alone does not sustain loyalty. Gen Z across West Africa is not blindly attached to personalities. They are attached to momentum. They want visible structural shifts, military, economic, and diplomatic. And this is where the current moment becomes delicate. If a major attack is followed by visible recalibration, stronger coordination, rapid counterpressure, and steady territorial control, the event is absorbed as part of a larger struggle. It becomes a chapter, not a verdict. If similar shocks accumulate without adaptation, belief erodes. And belief in conflict zones is a currency. Young Africans understand that insurgent warfare is complex. Many of them are digitally literate enough to follow global conflicts. They know that even technologically advanced states face insurgent ambushes. They know asymmetry favors unpredictability. But they are done with leaders who hide behind complexity to excuse stagnation. They want evidence of learning. Did intelligence failures get corrected? Did reinforcement cycles shorten? Did communication improve? The social contract is evolving. It is no longer based purely on electoral rituals or military symbolism. It is based on performance under pressure. This generation also sees the broader geopolitical shift. They understand that Burkina Faso is repositioning itself regionally through the alliance of Sahel states. They recognize that distancing from older Western security frameworks is risky, but potentially transformative. So when violence spikes, they don't immediately interpret it as failure. They interpret it as a stress test. And here lies the tension. Can a state undergoing structural realignment maintain security long enough for reforms to mature? Because reform in conflict is like building a bridge during a storm. The storm does not pause, it intensifies. Which brings us to the final unavoidable question, the one that will define whether this moment fades or reshapes the trajectory entirely. What would a genuine turning point actually look like? Not emotionally, but strategically. A turning point is not an announcement. It is not a speech from a podium. It is not a viral clip. It is not a declaration that everything is under control. A real turning point in Burkina Faso's security landscape would be visible in patterns, not promises. First, frequency. If coordinated base assaults begin to decline over the next 6 to 12 months, that signals compression. Insurgent networks rely on maintaining operational rhythm. When that rhythm slows, it often indicates disrupted logistics, fractured command chains, or successful intelligence penetration. Second, depth of control. It is one thing to retake a town. It is another to keep it functional. A genuine shift would mean administrative presence returning, teachers reopening classrooms, markets operating beyond daylight hours, and medical posts functioning without constant escort. Control is not just military, it is civic. Third, mobility constraints. insurgent groups in the Sahel depend on fluid cross-border movement. A turning point would show tighter coordination between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, not in statements, but in synchronized operations that limit corridor access. When fighters find routes closing, their ability to stage large-scale attacks diminishes. Fourth, recruitment pressure. Every insurgency survives on replenishment. If local recruitment declines because communities feel more secure or economically anchored, the long-term balance changes. Youth who see alternatives are less likely to join armed movements. This is where security and economic policy intersect. Agricultural stability, infrastructure expansion, and local industry matter as much as armored vehicles. Now here is the difficult part. None of this happens overnight. Insurgencies are ecosystems. They shrink when multiple pressure points align, such as military disruption, economic resilience, regional cooperation, and narrative stability. Remove one, and the system regenerates. So when we talk about this recent major attack, we must resist the temptation to label it either apocalypse or insignificance. It is neither. It is a stress indicator. If the state responds with tighter coordination, faster reinforcement cycles, clearer communication, and sustained territorial presence, then this moment becomes evidence of resilience. If responses are slow, fragmented, or reactive without adaptation, then the attack becomes a warning flare. For African Gen Z watching closely, this is not about blind optimism. It is about disciplined expectation. They are not asking for a miracle. They are asking for direction. They understand that sovereignty without security feels hollow. But they also understand that security without sovereignty can become dependency disguised as protection. The path forward demands both. Burkina Faso today stands in a prolonged test, not of ideology, but of endurance. The region remains volatile. External interests remain active. Armed groups remain dangerous. But history shows that protracted conflicts eventually tilt when structural adjustments outpace insurgent evolution. The question is no longer whether the country can avoid attacks entirely. No state in asymmetrical warfare can. The question is whether each attack makes the system stronger or weaker. And that answer will not come from commentary. It will come from continuity, from whether 6 months from now, the pattern looks different from what it does today. That is what a turning point looks like, not a headline. A shift in trajectory. Let us know in the comments section, can Burkina Faso rise from this? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about, the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.